So I'm Rachel McCraddock. I graduated from law school at Cal Western this last spring in 2011, and I'm graduating from Master's in Social Work at San Diego State this year, and I volunteer at St. Vincent de Paul doing research on homelessness. Consensus is coming to an agreement, a body of people all coming to the same, I don't know if I would go so far as to say conclusion, but at least being able to tolerate the same decision 100%. There's a line that you'll hear a lot called tyranny of the majority, and that means that though most people, or more than 50% of the people represented or speaking, are in favor of something, there are meaningful pieces of information that fewer people hold, but they're just as valuable. It's not to say that an idea has greater force or worth just because more people hold it. You could have one person who would have been completely outvoted that has something to offer to the body that could change the decision of the body because it's worthwhile. Consensus is important on this level because it demonstrates what people are capable of if they speak with each other, if we build community, if we build relationships. It demonstrates that humans are driven by relationships and building community and not necessarily driven by fortifying themselves against threats and playing game theory through electoral politics. That is a realist argument that you hear a lot about how wars play out, about how nation states will treat each other, and also about how elections will resolve. Those are arguments against third-party politics that you'll hear a lot. And so if you can do consensus successfully on this scale, and this scale is quite large in my experience, it's the largest I've ever seen, then you have an applied sort of an example of success in humans doing these kinds of cooperative efforts that can unpack some of those arguments. So prior to this, I've done anarchist organizing in little affinity groups. So the first time I used consensus was in San Diego, doing Radioactive Radio, which is a pirate station that we ran out of a house in South Park. And we had a little manual of what consensus was, and it was one particular model. And there were tactics in that model for coming to agreement if there were people that were blocking the consensus, like the fishbowl technique. And we would use that as a group, but we started with something called points of unity, where we all decided why we were there. We were there to make radio. We were there to do it without being regulated by the FCC. We were about free speech rights and having a voice that was an alternative to the mainstream media in San Diego. So that's an example of how consensus operated there, and it was pretty successful. It was just a matter of deciding who was going to be on the schedule on the radio and what our messages were going to be and whether we should limit who could enter. At one point we did make a decision to limit who could enter. We weren't just about free speech. We had like a Nazi guy at one point have a show, and then we decided we didn't want to do that anymore. So we did make an out-group decision. Like one of the points of unity then became that we had specific politics and that our radio stream was going to have those politics. After that, we used consensus in the clown troupe, Circa, and that was an art group, and we knew that we were there to be sort of a security group, but also to diffuse some of the tension that was coming up between the Minutemen and day laborers and the advocates of immigrants in San Diego. This is right after the first May Day march that the Minutemen sort of frothed up and were going to the Home Depots and harassing day laborers. And so that then sort of incited a reaction among the community that advocated for immigrants' rights, and the clown troupe was one of those groups. And so it's been the same model for me until this one. This one's the first one I've seen that's tiered, where we have committees that consensus and then bring their propositions to a general body that also consensus. I think that's really amazing. There aren't explicit points of unity, though, for the general body in this case, or for the subcommittees, to my knowledge. I think that they exist. They're just not spoken, and there's some argument about some basic principles like tactics with how to deal with enforcement, and I feel like that's a primary tension. But maybe that's because I'm on the legal committee. So, that's how this experience differs from the experience I had in the past. But the scale I'm talking about in the past is like 6 people, right? People that have been friends, that have partied together, that know each other, that trust each other. And here we have a lot of people that have never met before. We've got coalitions ranging from libertarian to anarchist, and I know that they're kind of close in the spectrum if you just loop it back around. But that's who we have, and so it's a pretty broad coalition that's still tackling this and still inviting new people in, and that it hasn't made any assertions that anyone should be excluded so far.
What are the new challenges presented by such a large-scale form of consensus?
The people blocking the decisions is a little bit more difficult, and so people that I've known in my personal life who have been all about 100% consensus are now, some of them advocating for 90% because the ideals of the people blocking are so absurd to them. And so it seems to me that there are a couple of factions developing that have different points of unity, different fundamental values, and that they're pitted against each other and sort of challenged to come to decisions together without having some kind of explicit in-group. And that's a point of contention, right? Like, should there be an in-group or an out-group at all?
Right.
Isn't that one of the questions that we're sort of tackling with this 99%? So another challenge is that the mix of personalities that is dedicated to direct action can be difficult to motivate to be sincere about discourse sometimes, because there's so much ego investment in being a leader, and there's a lot of ego investment in being heard. And I think that this kind of action draws that type of character, and that character is very useful to have at the head of a march, and to gather people from the street that would not otherwise come out. That character is necessary to this environment, but when it comes to being sincere and vulnerable in an exchange, it takes a little while to get that type of personality to let their guard down enough that they're willing to give other people space and to hear other people and to acknowledge that in fact other people are hearing them.
Do you foresee the consensus method as it's being used here being functional on a national level or even on a global level?
I tend to believe that consensus decision making could be used to manage government bodies. I don't know that I think that the whole world could necessarily come to the same conclusion about everything. I think that it's possible. I'm kind of attached to this points of unity idea, so I think it's possible for the globe to decide there are some things that are important to us. I feel like it's possible for the globe to decide it's important to us to manage our environment, in a way that will sustain human life. Not necessarily to maintain a certain population of trees, but if we frame it in terms of sustaining human life, I feel like it's possible that the world could consent on that, and nation states can conduct themselves, if they continue to exist, in a manner that would further that end. So I do think that consensus is possible on some issues, but there's
it'd have to be rather general and universal issues. It seems like.
I think so. I don't think that we could expect the diversity of cultures on the planet to consensus about manner of dress, for example.
Okay.
I think that it would have to be at a really fundamental ethical level that we would tackle those things, or ask a diverse body to tackle those things. Mm-hmm. Then we get to issues of cultural pluralism, right? And where are the ethical thresholds for different people? Like, when do you allow for difference, and when is it a fundamental problem to you that this type of difference should exist?
Mm-hmm.
My name is Ryan Clement. I'm a former military journalist, and I'm here at Occupy San Diego. Consensus, to me, so far from what I've taken part in here, is a process where it allows every individual voice to be heard and represented, and then beyond heard and represented, have immediate empowerment. You can come to a General Assembly meeting and take part in a discussion and a proposal, and say your interests weren't represented in this proposal. You have the power to change that proposal and make it work for you, so that you're included in this decision in the end. And I think that's what separates it from a lot of other things, is that it's more than a protest. We're all protesting what's happening in everyday life, how our society functions as a whole. The fact that we can't go to sleep at night and feel good about, or even know if the decisions that we made about a certain product that we bought or something was, achieved through any kind of moral standards, So it just differs from a protest in the sense that after protests are done, people go home. And using consensus, it keeps people around, it keeps people talking. It's an ongoing conversation that happens, and the conversation isn't limited to anybody. Everyone has as much relevance as the next person, and if it grows and evolves, you could have a world where everyone is represented and where everyone looked out for each other. I think in forms, it definitely could be possible. New York's a great example of that. Even though San Diego is smaller than New York, we've had trouble coming to consensus on certain things, and people will sometimes start to say, "See, consensus is not where it's at. See, this isn't working," because people are used to getting things so fast. If we're going to make change, we have to make it now. But consensus is a little bit different in that sense that it slows the decision-making process down to ensure that you're coming to the correct decision, so that when you reach a decision, you know that you have the power of everyone around you behind that decision. Everyone's represented in that.